Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, as so often, the bad news in the market started before we even woke up in the UK, a shadow that follows the sun around the world from Asia to America. It's a negative spiral and it has the markets enthralled, with the index of London's leading shares falling about 2.5% today. Paris and Frankfurt fared even worse. New York is wheezing badly. Why? Well, our economics editor, Paul Mason, joins me again. Now, Paul, again, another week of bad news. What's going on?
Well, it's another day of bad news, and not just a sort of 1, 2, 3% falls in the major stock markets of the world, but big falls in bank shares. Barclays, 7% down in a day. Credit Suisse, 8.4% down in a day. Deutsche, 6%. The long-term reason is the growth is slowing, quantitative easing, this $12 trillion of printed money that's supposed to keep the world going is running out of steam. The shorter-term trigger is that investors are beginning to understand central banks are probably going to do more of what we call negative interest rates.
And what exactly is that?
Well, you take £100, put it in the bank for a year, you expect at least £101 there at the end. Interest. On the negative interest rates, there's, by guarantee, not by accident, going to be £99 there. Now, we don't yet experience that, people who have money in the bank, lucky enough to have it in the bank. But when banks put their money in the central bank or with each other, when the central bank sets a negative interest rate, that means that's going to happen to a bank. And of course, when people realise that, they take their money out of investing in banks.
So what else can governments do?
Well, they can do more negative interest rates. It's not going to be great for banks. But I think we have to recognise that for the past 8 years, those parts of the world that have been doing austerity, like ours, have had it offset by this policy of quantitative easing. We now almost come to the end of the road of that, and we have to think if governments all over the world and central banks are really looking into their kind of toolkit and asking, how do we revive growth? And there are only two big levers, monetary policy, fiscal policy. I think we'll see both of them revisited if this carries on and gets worse.
Paul, thanks very much indeed. Well, joining me now are the economist Anne Pettifer and the financial journalist Alistair Heath. Thanks to both of you for coming in. Well, you just heard Paul there. It seems to be that governments are simply running out of options. Do you agree, Alistair?
Yes, I mean, I think fundamentally this crisis, or at least the latest incarnation of this crisis over the last few days, is the markets and investors finally understanding that central banks are not these omniscient, godlike creatures that can just constantly, reboot the economy when things go wrong. They've been doing this for years and years and years, and what they've really only achieved in doing is kicking the can endlessly down the road. The problem is we're nearing the end of that road, and the central banks are running out of things that they can do to get the economy going again, and that especially is hitting financial stocks, which have been so reliant on all of this.
And what is at the end of that road, Anne? Is it another full-throttle recession or something worse?
Well, who knows? Financial markets aren't the best predictors of crises and can be volatile anyway. But the question that I want to ask is, what are our governments or our central bankers going to do when we reach the end of the road? And have they got any plans? And as the governor of the Bank of England told us very recently, we are the most exposed economy in the world. We're the most open. Furthermore, we are imposing fiscal consolidation on a scale that no other OECD country. In other words, we are deliberately contracting our economy. Is that going to be reversed? And will it be reversed in time? That's what I worry about. Our government is so hell-bent on contracting economic activity at a time when we are very exposed to the Glencores, to the banks, to all of what's going on in the world. We want to have some reassurance from governors and the central bank and from the government that we're going to be protected from these.
But then
threats.
in Sweden, for instance, today they cut interest rates to 0.5% again. So, I mean, this negative interest rates, as Paul was just talking about, I mean, this is a pretty desperate measure, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, negative interest rates are a desperate measure. But actually, I mean, I actually believe, I disagree with Anne on this matter. I think the UK actually is in a relatively good place. We're not in a great place. Our economy is slowing quite dramatically. And, it may be the case that this great jobs engine at the heart of our economy is going to start running out of steam. But I think we're more protected than other countries. I think we're going to do better than the Eurozone. We're doing better than quite a lot of these economies. I think our openness and our diversification are actually helping us. And I don't think that whatever policy of austerity that the Chancellor is pursuing is actually damaging us. I think quite the contrary, is helping us withstand the coming storm.
But really what the viewers want to know is how worried should they be? How likely is another recession? I mean, on a scale of 1 to 10, what would you say?
I think that the likelihood is very high, and I think viewers should be warned of this. And it's not just a recession, but it's another financial crisis, another banking failure, really. And are the central banks going to bail out the banks, but not the rest of us? That is the question.
I think the risk is not extremely high for the UK yet. I think the risk is increasing every single day because of the impact on banks and the financial system. But I think at the moment, the big risk is not a recession. The big risk is much slower growth and even further declines in equities. The FTSE 100 is already down more than 20%, which has been very, very bad news for people with pensions, people with ISAs, and everybody who's invested in the stock market.
Now, in the 1920s, you had the famous crash of 29, and then things got a bit better, and then they got a lot worse. Because of mistakes made by central banks and by governments, are mistakes being made today that we will rue down the road?
Yes, I think there are. I think the big mistake that's been made is that we're underestimating the weakness of global demand, and we're doing nothing to improve aggregate demand in the global economy.
But putting interest rates below zero, that's what they're trying to do.
Yes,
and keep the money in the bank, it's going to rot, you might as well spend it.
When prices are falling, when companies like Glencore are suffering, and the oil industry and the steel industry are suffering, negative interest rates are not helping at that. We need to activate demand, and I think that Alistair's being quite complacent.
I'm not being complacent at all. I think we made the opposite mistake, which is I think central banks have micromanaged and over-intervened over the past few years.
Yes,
They've not allowed the economy to get through all the mistakes of the past. They've not allowed the economy to liquidate some of the mistakes and malinvestments, the problems of the past. We've tried to kick the can down the road endlessly, and we are where we are now. I think, if anything, governments have not gone far enough when it comes to balancing their budgets and reducing their public spending, because if there is another recession, I think it will come with a fiscal crisis, and then we'll be in real trouble.
Just very briefly and finally, I mean, where are there any bright spots at all? China seems to be tanking, emerging markets are in a terrible state, America is also flirting with recession. Where's the bright spot?
There aren't any bright spots.
There aren't any.
And that is
There's one bright spot, which is the price of oil and the reduction in energy costs.
That is symptomatic of weakness.
The reduction in energy costs is very good for consumers and companies in the UK. It's bad for other reasons.
It
I think there's some
it doesn't seem
good
to have
spots.
performed its magic.
Well,
the opposite
that's the reason why the economy is still growing. So it's helped consumers, the price of petrol is low, and people have got more money in their pocket. But on balance, the situation is quite poor.
I think the threats are severe, and we really need to take
Two
them
economists
seriously.
arguing, who would have thought? Alistair Heath and Pettifer, thank you very much indeed.
Thank you.
I've been